Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. I'm your host, Matt Connarton, and that's probably obvious. And it is Wednesday, God, what's the date? Is it the 14th already? Wow. It's almost Halloween. So welcome everybody. So lots to talk about today, of course. You know, there's a big debate last night, which we'll discuss to the extent that I can. At some point, I'll want to move on from it because I thought it was a little boring, to be honest with you. But before we get to all that, so I hate to start the show on kind of a downer, but I do feel compelled to say something about it. We got some sad news recently here at MPTS. We did lose one of our own. Howard McCarthy passed away at the age of 87 a few days ago, since the last time I was here, which was a week ago, obviously. And I know that he had some health problems and whatnot, so it wasn't a complete shock, but still, it's a sad time. And he was I don't know how long he had a show here on MPTS. I know it was a long time, many years. He used to, back when I was Norm's co-host, and actually it continued after I was no longer Norm's co-host on Norm and Friends, but Howard would come in, or Howie, the old lamplighter, as he liked to be called. He would come in for the final 10 minutes or so of Norm's show and perform for everyone, and that was really cool. And of course, Howie had his own show on here too. Like I said, he was a fixture here for many years, and I always used to say, when it came to Howie and performing, singing along with his boombox and whatnot that he would bring in, not everyone got it. But I always said, so what? Not everyone should. It's not everything is for everyone. But for those who did get it, so to speak, and appreciated it, Howie made a lot of people happy and put a lot of smiles on people's faces and was just a really, really nice man. And I used to look forward to seeing him here every Wednesday. So, and actually, very interesting guy, too. There was, when Glenn R.J. Willett used to do a Friday night edition of Willett at Large on QCE News, which you could watch online. I used to go down there and help out with that show. And one of those shows, Howie came in, and Glenn interviewed him during the show, and a very interesting guy. A nice man and also very interesting. He was a veteran. He had seen war and had a lot of stories to tell. And, I didn't know him as well as some folks around here did. And I know that today, if you're watching this live on Wednesday, today from 4 to 6 on Norm and Friends, Norm has, I'm not sure exactly what's in store, but he has some sort of a tribute planned for Howie. So that's nice that Norm is doing that. And like I said, Howie was a part of Norm's show for a long time. So I wanted to mention that. And like I said, I don't want to start the show on a down note, but I think it's important to acknowledge, that we've lost someone, and it was someone who was, like I said, I don't know how many years, but he was here before I was here. I know that. Doing shows here and whatnot. So condolences to Howard's family and friends, and I don't know who he has for family in the area. He may have family in other parts of the country. I'm not sure. I know he used to bounce back and forth between here and Florida. So, but condolences out to everybody who knew him and loved him, and he will be missed around here. So I wanted to mention that. And moving on from that, of course, we'll get into some politics. I do want to say, too, last week, and I'm flying solo this week, but last week we had a great guest on the show, Joe LaChance, who came on. And we had a really interesting conversation. And, he's running for local office. He's already a New Hampshire state legislator, and he's also running for local office here in the city of Manchester. But, for those who watch the show online, from other places, a lot of the issues that we talked about certainly apply and are relevant to other parts of the country, particularly in terms of marijuana, cannabis, medical marijuana legalization versus decriminalization, et cetera. I thought it was a really interesting conversation. I thought he was a great guest, and we'll definitely be having him on again soon. But if you missed it, of course, we do archive all the shows at ipmnation.com. We put them on both our Vimeo and our YouTube channels, and so you can find those online, right at the website. And someone is calling me, and I forgot to mute my phone. Instead, I put it on vibrate. So I will have to get back to whoever is calling me. Hey, if you're watching, call me on the air. I've had this happen where someone will try to call me during the show because they want to say something on the show, and then they'll call my cell phone instead of the number that you're supposed to call, and then they go, oh. So the debate last night, the Democratic debate, the first of the Democratic debates for 2016, as these political titans battle for the nomination. Like I said, we talked about it last night on the radio show, and we devoted a couple of segments to it, but by halfway through the show, we shifted gears. The debate went right up to 11 o'clock, and the radio edition of Unleashed, of course, you can hear weeknights at 11 p.m. on IPM Nation, and Tuesdays and Thursday nights were also on Home Times Radio. And, I'd originally thought we'd probably spend the entire show on it, but I really was kind of bored with the whole thing, to be very honest. I think on some level, I had hoped that it would be as exciting and interesting as the first Republican debate that we've seen so far, but it wasn't. And I kind of knew, like I said, on some level I had hopes, but I also kind of knew it wouldn't be. I mean, for one thing, you've got half as many people on that stage. And for another, the Republican debate, just especially with Trump in there, just much livelier. I had said for a long time that I thought the 2012 Republican debates were some of the greatest television in history. I thought that this first Republican debate with Trump in it was even better than that. And as one would expect with Donald Trump in the debates. So last night's debate with Hillary and Bernie and three other people, it's almost, in some ways, not to disrespect or disparage anyone, but it's almost not worth mentioning their names. It's almost like when I was a kid, and some people, who watch are too young to even probably have seen it, but I used to watch reruns of a show called Gilligan's Island, which the show itself was so old that the first season of the show was actually in black and white. But in the first season of the show, they'd go through, people who are familiar with the show will know what I'm talking about. They go through the names of the people, the people who are stranded on this island, Gilligan, the skipper too. And then, but it leaves out two of the people at the end of the theme song. In only season one, it said, and the rest, not even mentioning, I guess they couldn't fit everybody's names into the original version of the theme song. Which always bugged me, by the way, because one of those people who got left out was the professor. The other one was Marianne. But to me, the professor was always the most important person on the show to begin with. Without the professor, they all would have been dead by the end of season one. Anyway, but plus he could make anything out of bamboo. But, that's kind of how it feels watching the Democratic debates. The average person, even people who follow politics, a lot of them don't even know who else is running. Whereas on the Republican side, you kind of know, they have so many candidates. They've got the, some people refer to it as the main stage, and you've got the kids table, for people who couldn't quite get onto the main stage. And I'll tell you what. So the three people, for those who don't know, obviously everyone knows Hillary and Bernie Sanders. You've also got Jim Webb, former senator, who, I can't even remember. Is he from Virginia? I think he's from Virginia, either Virginia or West Virginia, I think. Former Delaware Governor Martin O'Malley. Is it Delaware or Maryland? See, I'm not even sure. One of those states, one of those small northeastern states. Oh no, it is Maryland, because he's also a former mayor of Baltimore. And you've got Lincoln Chafee, former governor of Rhode Island. That one I'm sure of. Former governor of Rhode Island, also a former senator. He's interesting because he went from being a Republican to an independent to a Democrat. We'll come back to that. But so you've got these three guys no one really cares about, to be blunt. In terms of none of the three of them are going to be the nominee. And they all had an opportunity last night. And this is one of the things I was looking for in the debate, and then it just didn't happen, which made it less interesting. This was an opportunity for one of them to kind of present themselves in a way that made the voters, the constituents, the Democrats who are going to be voting in these primaries take them seriously. This was a chance for one of them to kind of step forward and say, hey, you know, I'm running too. Don't forget about me. And it just didn't happen. None of the three of them really, I mean, they all had interesting moments, and we'll get to those, but none of them really kind of moved up at all. It's not like you saw with the Republican debate that we saw a few weeks ago. You know, you saw Carly Fiorina really kind of emerge as a, you know, as a someone who, while she rose in the polls right after the debate, people were very impressed with her performance, even though she's absolutely terrifying when she talks about foreign policy. You know, so she emerged. A couple other candidates, I think, kind of raised their standing, their stature a little bit, but for the most part, you know, not anyone really became the front. I mean, Trump continues to be the front runner. But with the Democratic debate last night, it was like no real movement. Now, the one person who may have had some movement was Hillary herself, because the next day, well, last night and the next day, I mean, it was already 11 p.m. Eastern when they got done. People are saying that she did really well and that she's kind of reaffirmed herself as the front runner. One data point that I saw said that, you know, whereas a few days ago, there was a poll that said that 50% of Democrats surveyed really wanted Joe Biden to get in. And now, after last night, there was a new poll that said 60% of Democrats surveyed don't want Biden to get in. They're fine with Hillary. I don't quite get it. I didn't see anything out of Hillary last night that impressed me. And there was one thing where I thought she fumbled pretty badly, and we'll get to that too, but I don't quite see what a lot of people are seeing in that she really was that impressive. I don't think she was that impressive. Now, I'm not saying I think she did badly. You know, I mean, she's been through enough of these. I mean, you know, she went through this in 2008, debating Obama and John Edward and, or Edwards rather. Wow, I got that mixed up for a second, which a lot of people do. One of them is the psychic guy, and one of them is the politician. Yeah, John Edward, singular, is the psychic. He's a very famous psychic. And John Edwards, the politician. You know, so she has experience with this, but so I thought she did fine. You know, I don't think she had a bad night, but I don't think she had a great night either. But there are a lot of people who really think she had a great night, which, if that's the general consensus, then maybe Biden has waited too long. See, my theory has been Biden is going to get in, but he's been biding his time a little bit because he wants to wait and see, you know, let Hillary continue to slowly implode. And as voters begin to look for someone who is more acceptable than Bernie Sanders, who continued to have a lot of energy and momentum behind him, Biden will eventually get in at the right moment, but it's already in the middle of October. And I figured by the end of September he would have announced something, and he still hasn't. So, I don't know. Now, with Hillary kind of reaffirming herself last night, in the eyes of many people, again, I don't quite understand it, but has Biden missed his moment? Or maybe he doesn't really want to run, and now the pressure will be off. Maybe he's relieved. I don't know. Who knows what he's thinking, but we'll see. I still think he'll get in, and I want him to get in because I just think it will be interesting if he does. Not that I necessarily, I don't know. I don't know if I prefer him to Hillary, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't really believe in any of these people. The other thing, though, that kind of came to my attention last night, Jim Webb, Senator Jim Webb, His presence in the debate, not that he had much of a presence, again, he didn't do anything to help himself or hurt himself necessarily. Lincoln Chafee sure hurt himself, but again, he was a non-factor to begin with, so who cares? But Jim Webb may actually sort of put a dent in a theory, another theory that I've had, that something that I've called the Hillary paradox, and it's this. You know, Republicans typically loathe Hillary Clinton. And what's kind of funny, though, is typically, I've always said, when you take Hillary Clinton and compare and contrast her with other potential Democratic nominees, Hillary is probably, you know, obviously Republicans want a Republican in the White House, but if they have to get stuck with a Democrat, Hillary is probably the one they would be the most happy with ideologically, because Hillary is not a liberal. She's just not. Now, that doesn't mean she doesn't have some liberal positions, but she's really very much sort of a moderate centrist. And, you know, in terms of foreign policy, I've always said I think she's basically a neoconservative. I think in foreign policy matters, I think she would have been very comfortable on the foreign policy team of the George W. Bush administration. You know, she voted in favor of the Iraq War, and I think she's very hawkish. So, and you know, and she's a corporatist and all that, and she's, you know, Wall Street loves her. I think that she would be very acceptable to Republicans if they could put aside sort of how they perceive her, how they feel about her, and, you know, just in terms of whatever it is that they hate about her. I mean, there's you know, I'm not a Republican, and I don't trust her, and I don't particularly like her that much, but there's a lot there to dislike. But, you know, if you can look at her in terms of pure ideology, she's probably the most acceptable. But then what I realized last night is it occurred to me watching the debate that there is someone actually in the field who's probably even more acceptable to Republicans, and that's Jim Webb. Jim Webb is known for being not a liberal. Jim Webb, and again, I'm no expert on Jim Webb. I don't know a ton about him, but from what I do know, he could probably pass for a liberal to moderate Republican if he had to. He was, I think it's fair to say, the most conservative guy on that stage, the most conservative candidate, I should say, on that stage last night, even more so than who I would argue is a moderate Hillary Clinton. So, you know, he's probably the one they'd be most comfortable with. Do I think Hillary will be the nominee? Yeah, I had been saying I think she's cooked, but like her husband Bill, she may be the comeback kid because she seems to have reversed her fortunes. Again, not from my perspective because of her debate performance itself, but because of the perception of everyone else, who seems to think that she did pretty well. We'll come back to some of the moments that happened in the debate, but you know, I love fact checking. There's you know, in terms of these debates, and, you know, we did this, of course, after the last Republican debate, too. It's always fun to sort of fact check with a website like factcheck.org. There's some great ones. Factcheck.org is great. PolitiFact is great. Those are probably my two favorite. They're nonpartisan sites where they just basically pick apart everyone says and tell you the truth. I realize that a lot of people aren't interested in that. A lot of people, Republicans and Democrats both, are just partisans who just run with the herd and will just blindly go along with whatever the herd says is the truth and just take that as the truth. You know, and I call it, I don't use the term as much as I used to, but I call it PIG, which is an acronym for partisan ideological groupthink. But for someone like me who really is more of an independent, I am interested in things like facts and truth. Silly me, right? So I've got something here from factcheck.org, which kind of breaks down the statements of the of various candidates during the debate last night. And by the way, one of the people who was a little careless with the truth was Bernie Sanders. And the only reason I make mention of that is because one of the things that I like about Bernie Sanders is that, you know, he will very often speak things in a very blunt manner, and he'll tell you the truth about some things, even though it's uncomfortable to hear it. So even though I'm not a Sanders supporter per se, because I'm not a socialist, you know, I'm a small government guy. But I like his bluntness and his blunt honesty on some things. Unfortunately, last night during the debate, even he, again, was a little careless with the truth in some instances. So it says here, again, this is from factcheck.org. The Democratic candidates for president: former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Senator Bernie Sanders, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, former Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Chafee, and former Senator Jim Webb gathered in Las Vegas for their first debate, hosted by CNN and Facebook. Let's go through some of these. Clinton, speaking on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Clinton revised her earlier position on the... and by the way, I caught this when she said it. I said, that doesn't sound right. Clinton revised her earlier position on the TPP, a proposed trade agreement between 12 Pacific Rim countries, claiming that she merely said she hoped it would be a gold standard. But her earlier support was more unequivocal. The topic arose when debate moderator Anderson Cooper, who did a fantastic job, by the way, asked Clinton if some of her recent position changes were tied to political expediency. Really kind of calling her on her BS. And he specifically referenced Clinton's recent decision to oppose the TPP. Cooper said, quote, "You supported this trade deal dozens of times. You even called it the gold standard. Now, suddenly, last week, you're against it. Will you say anything to get elected?" Unquote. Well, Clinton said that over the course of her career, her values and principles have remained consistent, though some positions have evolved as she absorbs new information. Which, in and of itself, that is completely reasonable, and I actually wish more people did that. You know, changing positions based on new information that is in conflict with your what you previously believed. Unfortunately, again, with partisan ideological groupthink, many people, probably most people, get locked into a very specific belief system, and the positions within that belief system, they won't change or waver from those even with the introduction of new information. They just won't. So that explanation in and of itself is perfectly reasonable, but suspect because it is coming from a politician. Here's what she said, quote, "You know, take the trade deal. I did say when I was Secretary of State 3 years ago that I hoped it would be the gold standard. It was just finally negotiated last week, and in looking at it, it didn't meet my standards. My standards for more new, good jobs for Americans, for raising wages for Americans, and I want to make sure that I can look into the eyes of any middle-class American and say, this will help raise your wages. And I concluded I could not," unquote. As did a lot of Democrats have been opposed to this, although a lot of Democrats have been opposed to this from the beginning. It's a very interesting dynamic scene. It's the only instance I can think of where Obama has really been pitted against his own party as Republicans siding with Obama on the Trans-Pacific. I always forget how to say it. It's been called two different things: the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Democrats really frustrated with the president over it. 2 days later in Singapore, Clinton again sang the praises of the TPP. She said, I won't read the quote, but it was a bunch of stuff lauding the agreement. We should note that Clinton's comments were made in part to promote the administration's ongoing negotiations of the TPP. Clinton tempered her language in support of the TPP after leaving her post as Secretary of State and moving toward a run for the presidency. As she wrote in her 2014 book, Hard Choices, because TPP negotiations are still ongoing, it makes sense to reserve judgment until we can evaluate the final proposed agreement. It's safe to say that the TPP won't be perfect, blah, 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 whatever. Earlier this month, Clinton took a more formal position against the TPP. I'm not going to read all that. I want to get through this. I want to make sure we don't run out of time. But, you know, it's just it's her changing positions on it. Now, Bernie Sanders and Social Security. Sanders claimed Social Security's finances could be extended and benefits expanded by simply taxing incomes above the current cap of $118,500. Sanders said this, and the way you expand Social Security is by lifting the cap on taxable incomes so that you do away with the absurdity of a millionaire paying the same amount into the system as somebody making $118,000. You do that, Social Security is solvent until 2061, and you can expand benefits. That sounds very suspect to me. Sanders is referring to legislation he has sponsored, the Social Security Expansion Act. It would increase future benefit payments and partially pay for that by applying employment and self-employment payroll tax not only to earnings up to the current cap, but also over $250,000 a year, and by levying a new 6.2% tax on investment income over $200,000 for a single person or $250,000 for married couples filing jointly. With no upper limit on the amount to be taxed. The chief actuary of the Social Security system analyzed the latest version of Sanders' proposal last month and concluded that it would indeed extend the life of Social Security trusts to 2065, not 2061. But Sanders failed to mention two key points. First, those subjected to the higher taxes would see no benefit from them. Unlike current payroll taxes, the new levies would not be used as a basis for calculating future benefits for those paying them, a sharp break from historical practice. Second, benefits would eventually have to be cut anyway. There's a little bit more there, but I don't want to get too deep into the numbers, partly for selfish reasons. I myself am not good at math, and numbers overwhelm me. There's an argument, by the way, for means testing, which is, and by the way, Trump was hit with this question, and he kind of didn't answer it directly, but he was asked during the last Republican debate about this, or a version of means testing, which is basically where, even though you've paid into the system, you don't necessarily get to get that money, that entitlement money, if you don't need it. So in other words, if you already have enough money where you don't need Social Security, you would cease to be eligible for Social Security, and in theory that would save money. The arguments against means testing are, number one, that's not fair. If you've paid into it, you should get it regardless of whether you need it or not. And number two, means testing people over a certain income amount, at least the ones that have been proposed thus far, really wouldn't save enough money to be worth it, essentially, and that you need bigger solutions than that. O'Malley's mangled wage statistic again. O'Malley repeated a dubious talking point that we've criticized before. He said this: our middle class is shrinking. Our poor families are becoming poorer, and 70% of us are earning the same or less than we were 12 years ago. As we reported in June, O'Malley is citing outdated figures that don't reflect a spike in real wages and earnings that has taken place over the past year or so. He bases the claim on a study by the Liberal Economic Policy Institute that was current only through 2014. Using the most current figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, real inflation-adjusted average weekly earnings of rank-and-file non-supervisory workers were 2.2% higher in August than they were a year earlier, and 5.8% higher than they were in August 2003, the 12-year period O'Malley specified. By the way, a couple things. So one of the reasons that these candidates get away with this stuff is, if it sounds good during the debate, I think this is the attitude. If it sounds good, just say it. Because most people aren't going to look into it. So there's really not a whole lot of accountability for what you say if you say things that are specific involving numbers. It's very easy to kind of bend and twist the facts when you're dealing with numbers. Partly because people like me, who aren't good at math, are confused by numbers and will either, whether I take you at your word or just assume you're full of BS and don't believe anything you say because you're a politician, I'm probably not going to dig too deeply and figure out whether or not you're telling the truth or how much you're bending the truth or lying. But the other thing, too, is this middle class is shrinking or the middle class is disappearing. You hear people say that a lot on both sides of the aisle. That's a talking point that's been around since I was a kid, and I got interested in politics at a really young age. And I remember being a kid and and hearing this politician say that all the time. We're losing the middle class. Now, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there isn't reason to be concerned and that the wealth in this country isn't becoming more and more concentrated at the top. It is. And I think that is something to be concerned about. But I get very jaded and cynical when I hear in the year 2015 the same talking points I heard when I was a kid and wonder, okay, if this was true then, why is it still true now? So in other words, if when I was a little kid and I heard people say, oh, we're losing the middle class, the middle class is disappearing, you would think by now in the year 2015, the middle class would be completely gone and we just have rich and poor people, right? Because back then, the middle class is disappearing. It's kind of like, I was talking about this recently on the radio show. Here's the thing. Rhetoric, the problem with political rhetoric and this sort of bumper sticker political culture that we live in, which has only gotten worse with, I think, sound bites. People express themselves in 140 characters on Twitter, and with 140 characters, you don't have much room to say a lot, but you can say some things that are just patently false that people who like you will believe and take you at your word. Again, it's PIG, partisan ideological groupthink at work. But a lot of what I hear today, it's all the same stuff as when I was a kid. And one of the things I hear constantly, and right now it's more Republicans than Democrats that say this because there's currently a Democrat in the White House, is I hear Republicans talk all the time, all this doom and gloom about the country. The country's coming apart. We're in serious trouble in America. The country is in serious trouble. We're on the edge of a cliff, and we need to figure out how to back away from that cliff. And we're circling the drain, and we're doomed if we don't have a change in direction. All that kind of stuff. And when there's a Republican in the White House, the same thing goes on with the Democrats. It's just the inverse of it. When George W. Bush was in the White House, you'd hear Democrats talking all the time. Oh, America's in trouble. We're coming apart at the seams. We're in serious trouble here. We're about to go over a cliff. We're on the precipice. And again, when I hear that stuff, I just kind of tune it out because I heard all the same stuff when I was a little kid. Politicians have been saying that stuff, that kind of rhetoric, using that kind of doom and gloom sort of language when the other party is in charge for at least as long as I've been alive. I mean, again, I remember 1980. I'm old enough to remember, again, I was just a little kid, but hearing Ronald Reagan talk about how with Jimmy Carter in the White House, the country was falling apart. America is completely coming unraveled. And then after 4 years of Reagan in 1984, hearing Democratic nominee Walter Mondale saying, look, we're in serious trouble. The country's falling apart. So for at least as long as I've been alive, if you take the rhetoric literally, if you take these people at their word and believe that what they're saying is literally true, America's been on the edge of a cliff that it's about to fall off of, for at least as long as I've been alive, and yet somehow I wake up every morning and America's still here. So when I hear people talk about how much trouble America's in and the country is falling apart, it's like, wow. For about 4 decades now, the country's been falling apart and about to fall off of a cliff. And probably longer. I'm sure if I looked back at some of the rhetoric before I was born, people were talking that way. I don't know. I mean, were people talking that way back in the 60s and 50s and 40s? I'm sure during the Great Depression, people were like, oh, America's already done. It's over, So, and the middle class is disappearing. Again, there is reason to be concerned. Absolutely. But is it true? I wonder, because I hear that talking point so much. That's part of the America's falling apart narrative that I wonder if it's true. I don't just tune it out and dismiss it like I do the larger sort of macro narrative that America's doomed. Let's see. Lincoln Chafee, remember him? on Rhode Island on unemployment. In his introductory remarks, Chafee claimed that Rhode Island had a larger drop in the unemployment rate than every other state but Nevada while he was governor. That's not correct for his total time in office. By the way, Rhode Island is known for having a pretty horrendous, I think at one point during the Great Recession, and this may still be the case now, they actually had the highest unemployment rate in the entire country. Brutal. Chafee said this, as governor, I came in at the depths of the recession and we turned my state around. Rhode Island had the biggest drop of the unemployment rate over my 4 budgets of all but one state. It happens to be Nevada where we're having this debate. We contacted a spokesman. Okay, that was Chafee's quote. Factcheck.org says, we contacted a spokeswoman for Chafee's campaign to get an exact time frame for his claim, but we didn't hear back. Rhode Island's unemployment rate was 11.2%. Oh my God, can you imagine? Well, if you have lived in Rhode Island, I guess you can't imagine because you've seen it. Their unemployment rate was 11.2% in January of 2011 when Chafee came into office, and it was 6.5% in January 2015 when he left office. Okay, that's pretty good. That's a decline of 4.7 percentage points and, perhaps more important, a percentage decrease of 42%. Nevada's unemployment rate dropped 6.5 percentage points over that time period, but California, North Carolina, and Florida, with declines of 5 percentage points, 4.9 percentage points, and 4.8 percentage points, respectively, also had larger declines than Rhode Island. So 4 states, not 1, had larger drops based solely on percentage points. Now, again, Lincoln Chafee can get away with saying this stuff because really, aside from somebody like me who gives a crap enough to want to read about it and read this to you, who's going to, what's it matter? He's not going to be the nominee. There's a little bit more to that, but we'll move on. Okay, Bernie Sanders exaggerates youth unemployment. As he has done many times before, Sanders overestimated the unemployment rate for black and Hispanic youth. Sanders said this, African-American youth unemployment is 51%. Hispanic youth unemployment is 36%. It seems to me that instead of building more jails and providing more incarceration, maybe, just maybe, we should be putting money into education and jobs for our kids. Now, by the way, putting the numbers themselves aside in terms of whether or not they are accurate, his overall point there, I agree with. And then factcheck.org says this, we have written about this once before. Sanders gets his figures from a June report by the left-leaning Economic Policy Institute, but the report clearly labels those figures as the rate of underemployment, not unemployment, and that is an important distinction. But it's also one that's easily maligned by politicians. Because as much as Bernie Sanders does present himself as sort of a non-politician, he is. The report said, quote, 51.3% of young black high school graduates are underemployed compared to 36.1% of young Hispanic high school grads and 33.8% of white high school grads. That was the average of a 12-month period ending in March. Okay, so there's more to that, but we'll continue moving on. This is important. Okay, Clinton on gun violence. In talking about the need for stronger gun control, Clinton said, quote, I think we have to look at the fact that we lose 90 people a day from gun violence. This has gone on too long, and it's time the entire country stood up against the NRA. Unquote. Annual gun deaths do average about 90 people a day, but only a third of those are homicides. Most gun deaths are suicides, a violent act, but not a crime, as some voters may think Clinton's claim implied. Oh, clearly that's what she was trying to put across. According to the most recent figures from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there were a total of 33,636 firearm deaths in 2013. That's 92 per day for the year. 63% of them, or 21,175, were suicides. Homicides totaled 11,208, and the rest were unintentional discharges, 505, legal intervention / war, 467, and undetermined, 281. Sanders wrong on U.S. inequality ranking. This is important. Sanders doubled down on a bogus claim that the income and wealth gaps between the affluent and the poor are larger in the United States than anywhere else. He said this, We should not be the country that has more wealth and income inequality than any other country. Yeah, my BS meter redlined when I heard him say that. I knew there was no way that's true. And according to factcheck.org, this is simply false. They say, when we first criticized Sanders for a similar claim back on May 28th, he at least qualified it by saying U.S. inequality was the widest of any major country. As we said in May, that's true only if Sanders excludes nations such as Russia, Turkey, and Brazil from his definition of major. But in the debate, Sanders substituted any for major and turned what we charitably called an exaggeration into a flat-out falsehood. We found that the U.S. ranked 42nd in income inequality using the Gini index, a widely used measure of inequality according to the World Bank. And as for wealth, the U.S. ranked 16th in the share of wealth held by the richest 1% out of the 46 economies studied. Russia, Turkey, Egypt, and Brazil were among those whose top 1% held more of their nation's wealth. That was according to the 2014 Global Wealth Data Book. Now, again, Sanders' a larger point is something that I think is worth being concerned about, certainly, especially as over time, and there is data to show this, that more and more of our nation's wealth has been concentrated at the top, within the top 1%. You used to hear about the top 2% a lot. Now you hear about the top 1% because it's become more concentrated, as I understand it. So that is true, but obviously some of these specifics in terms of contrasting us with other countries is wrong. Okay, Clinton's emails. When asked about her unusual email arrangement as Secretary of State, Clinton said, quote, "What I did was allowed by the State Department," unquote. That's not the full story. Clinton conducted government business exclusively using a personal email account, and those emails were stored on a private server. As we have written before, the State Department and the Clinton campaign have cited a National Archives and Records Administration rule issued in 2009 that said federal agencies that allow the use of personal emails must preserve them, quote, "in the appropriate agency record-keeping system," unquote. So personal emails were allowed. But federal rules also required Clinton to preserve her work emails, quote, "at the end of the secretary's tenure or sooner if necessary," unquote. She did not turn over copies of her emails to the State Department until December 5th, 2014, nearly 2 years after she left office on February 1st, 2013. Also, whether the State Department allowed it or not, Clinton's decision, quote, "to conduct all email correspondence through a private email network using a non.gov address is inconsistent with long-established policies and practices under the Federal Records Act and NARA regulations governing all federal agencies," unquote, according to congressional testimony of Jason R. Barron, a former director of litigation at the National Archives, who is now a attorney at Drinker Biddle. So that's the factcheck.org article fact-checking the debate last night. Couple of weird things. Well, let me. There's an article here from Mediaite declaring Anderson Cooper as the winner of last night's Democratic debate. Anderson Cooper did a fantastic job, and I thought right out of the gate, he was very, on Mediaite, I'm not going to read the entire article, but Joe Concha, who writes this, he said Cooper came off as focused, unafraid, loaded with quality, relevant research. He asserted himself as the strongest figure of the presentation, candidates included. Yeah, absolutely. And I made a comment, I don't have it pulled up, but I made a comment on Facebook that any Republicans who today talk about or accuse Anderson Cooper or CNN of being soft during last night's debate because they're part of the liberal media that we always hear about. Anyone who says that is just a disingenuous partisan and who didn't really watch the debate or certainly didn't watch it with any sense of objectivity. I haven't seen anybody online really saying that, by the way, that Anderson Cooper was soft or went easy on the candidates or anything like that. But I guarantee you, just because it's how it works that on talk radio today, right now at this moment, there's some conservative radio talk show host somewhere going, oh, can you believe Anderson Cooper and CNN? They're once again proving why they're just part of the liberal media, and they went soft, and they just clearly they want Hillary to win and all this, and because that's just what they do. At some point today, Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and all these other people will be saying that. The conservative talk radio hosts will say that and are saying that today. I guarantee you. I'm sure Laura Ingraham has already had some snarky comment today about Anderson Cooper. I said on Facebook last night, Anderson Cooper could throw a brick at Hillary Clinton's face, and some conservative talk show host will be saying the next day, oh, Anderson Cooper, he just went soft, and he's a liberal, and, you know. Jen, to her credit, because she's a Republican, last night on the radio show, Jen acknowledged that Anderson Cooper, she agreed with me, did a great job, so. But I'm sure there are Republicans today who are, because, you know, that liberal media thing, it's a rhetorical crutch that they will never let go. That's another thing I've been hearing since I was a kid. Anytime any media outlet anywhere reports anything, the Republicans don't like, oh, it's a liberal media. So some other weird things last night. I mentioned Jim Webb earlier. We'll get back to that just for a moment. I mentioned that I think he would probably be, instead of Hillary, the most acceptable to your typical Republicans. Certainly the manliest. Maybe that's odd to say because Hillary Clinton is in the running. I don't mean because Hillary Clinton is manly. That's not what I mean. I mean because there is a female in the race. Hillary Clinton, though, by the way, I did say on Facebook, and some people will criticize me or call me sexist for bringing this up, but it's just something I noticed. And she's fair. I make, you know, like everybody else, I am fascinated by Donald Trump's hair. I found myself fascinated last night watching Hillary Clinton by her lack of face movement when she speaks. And I wonder if Hillary Clinton has had Botox. I suspect that she might have, because there are parts of her face that should move when she talks that don't move when she talks. So, not that she'd be the only one to have had some sort of procedure or injections or whatnot. I mean, Joe Biden, granted Biden hasn't announced yet, I still think he will, but Biden years ago got hair plugs. I mean, if you look at pictures of Joe Biden from, 20 years ago, he was bald, then all of a sudden he's got hair in the front. And I've always suspected it's because he wants to be president someday, because we typically don't elect bald presidents for whatever reason. But this was interesting. So one of the things that came up is Jim Webb talking about killing an enemy soldier. By the way, Jim Webb, I don't know if he's had Botox maybe, because he seems to only have one facial expression. Jim Webb always looks angry. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen him smile, but he seems like an angry guy. He seems like a very unhappy individual. And he has a reputation for being such. So that's more than just speculation. But I've never met him, so I don't know. But so Arthur Delaney writes this. This is from HuffPost. Former Senator Jim Webb, Democrat of Virginia, had the strangest answer Tuesday when CNN debate moderator Anderson Cooper asked each Democratic presidential candidate to name an enemy he or she had made. Webb said, smiling, oh, I guess he did smile. I did miss a few minutes of the debate. Quote, I would have to say the enemy soldier that threw the grenade that wounded me, but he's not around to talk to, unquote. Webb, a Marine veteran, was awarded a Navy Cross for Valor in Vietnam. He'd been approaching a bunker when an enemy soldier threw a grenade his way, according to the award citation. Observing the grenade land dangerously close to his companion, First Lieutenant Webb simultaneously fired his weapon at the enemy, pushed the Marine away from the grenade, and shielded him from the explosion with his own body. Although sustaining painful fragmentation wounds from the explosion, he managed to throw a grenade in the aperture and completely destroy the remaining bunker. The other debate candidates listed Iranians, the National Rifle Association, of course, and various industries and special interest groups as their enemies. So Webb had the most interesting and impressive answer to that. Let's see. The strangest answer during the debate came from Lincoln Chafee. I felt uncomfortable watching this moment. This is also from HuffPost. Molly Riley wrote, presidential candidate and former Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Chafee struggled to explain during Tuesday's Democratic debate why he voted in favor of deregulating big banks in 1999. CNN host and debate moderator Anderson Cooper asked Chafee how he would press Hillary Clinton on Wall Street when he voted for a bill repealing Glass-Steagall Act, a landmark financial regulation bill that separated the banking industry from the securities industry. And by the way, I mean, that all happened during the Clinton administration. A lot of people trace the bubble that burst, setting off the Great Recession. They trace part of that to the banking deregulation under Bill Clinton. One of the ways in which Bill Clinton, certainly no liberal in terms of fiscal policy, and why, again, I don't think Hillary would be either. But this was Chafee's explanation. He said, quote, Glass-Steagall was my very first vote. I just arrived. My dad had died in office, unquote. So in other words, he was saying, hey, I was new there. I didn't know what I was doing. That's basically how I took it. Very strange moment. Chafee was appointed to the U.S. Senate seat held by his father, John Chafee, until his death in 1999. So when his dad died, the state appointed Lincoln. Cooper continued to press Chafee, asking if he didn't understand the bill before voting on it, and Chafee replied, I think you're being a little rough. It was awkward to watch that. I was cringing. Again, not that it matters. I mean, as soon as the Iowa caucus hits, Chafee will be out of there, and so will Webb and O'Malley, I would imagine. Just a terrible moment. We're almost out of time. Let's try to get to one. Well, let's finish off with this. The 11 best quotes from the first Democratic debate. We'll go through these quickly. There's only 11. This is from Politico.com. Nick Gass wrote this. Discussing Hillary Clinton's email scandal, Bernie Sanders zigged where other Republicans have zagged. He said, quote, let me say something that might not be great politics, but I think the secretary is right, and that is that the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails, unquote. Thank you. Me too, Clinton responded. The two then exchanged a friendly handshake. Jim Webb, who is apparently bearish on Sanders' promise of radical political change, said, quote, I don't think the revolution's coming, unquote. I myself have expressed that to many people over the years. I don't think the revolution's coming either. Number 3, responding to Sanders' assertion that the U.S. could learn something from other countries like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, Clinton defended her approach in reining in capitalism's excesses. She said, quote, but we are not Denmark. I love Denmark. We are the United States of America, and it's our job to rein in the excesses of capitalism so that it doesn't run amok and doesn't cause the kind of inequalities we're seeing in our economic system, unquote. That was a good answer. Lincoln Chafee said when pressed on his changing party affiliation, he said he may have switched parties, but his views remain consistent. Quote, Anderson, you're looking at a block of granite when it comes to the issues, unquote. Eventually, he said, look, the party left me in terms of explaining leaving the Republican Party because, again, he was a Republican, then he left and became an independent, and then he became a Democrat. Basically, in other words, the party got too conservative for him. And he was always kind of a moderate to liberal Republican. But he could have explained himself much better than he did. Instead of this I'm a block of granite on the issues thing, which just sounds strange. Number 5, Chafee discussed the importance of repairing American credibility after the invasion of Iraq, hitting Clinton for her vote to authorize the Iraq War in 2002. Quote, so anytime someone is running to be our leader and a world leader, which the American president is, credibility is an issue out there with the world, and we have repair work to be done. I think we need someone that has the best in ethical standards as our next president. That's how I feel. And then Anderson Cooper asked Secretary Clinton, do you want to respond? And Clinton said no. So that was interesting, Chafee. I'll give him a little credit there, kind of a veiled shot at Clinton and her ethics or potential lack of. And by the way, Chafee during his opening statement too, and I think during his closing statement too, he mentioned something about, I've never had any scandals. And that's one of the reasons you should support me. I've never had a political scandal. Again, that sounds like a veiled shot at Clinton, who has had several. One more, because we're almost out of time. Bernie Sanders asked by Cooper if he considered himself a capitalist. This was a little laborious. Do I consider myself part of the casino capitalist process by which so few have so much and so many have so little, by which Wall Street's greed and recklessness wrecked this economy? No, I don't. I believe in a society where all people do well, not just a handful of billionaires, unquote. All right, one more. Number 7, this is Clinton said amid an exchange about the 2007 to 2008 recession. Quote, I respect Sanders' passion and intensity. I represented Wall Street as a senator from New York, and I went to Wall Street in December of 2007 before the big crash that we had, and I basically said, cut it out, quit foreclosing on homes, quit engaging in these kinds of speculative behaviors, unquote. Did she? I don't remember that. Maybe she did. We're about out of time, but if you want to read the rest of these, it's at politico.com. So, again, I wasn't too excited to discuss the debate last night on the radio show, but having a little time to mull it over and look at some of the things online, especially the fact checking. I love the fact checking. There's some things there worth dissecting and breaking down. And that's what we've done here today. So thanks everybody for watching, and don't forget the radio edition of Unleashed 5 nights a week on IPMNation.com at 11 p.m. Eastern, and every Tuesday and Thursday night. We're also live on Om Times Radio at omtimes.com/IOM. And that's it for now. If you're watching live, I'll be back later with Gary on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, and we'll talk at y'all a little bit later. Thanks everybody. We'll be right back.